Welcome to this short talk entitled The Buddha in Your Home. Subtitle, How to Set Up a Home Shrine. Well, I suppose the first thing, or the first question perhaps to answer is, do we actually need a home shrine in order to sit Zazen meditation? And in short, the answer is no, we don't, but it certainly helps. And I think it's important also because it shows something of a little bit of dedication, particularly if we are, going to call ourselves Zen Buddhist trainees or Buddhists at all. It sort of does behove us and perhaps not unreasonable to have something at home that we could just call a straightforward Buddhist shrine. But I think there's also some important practical as well as psychological reasons why we might want to consider setting one up. And probably the most important one is that if we're going to be sitting Zazen meditation regularly, then we're going to need to cultivate a good habit. And we've talked about this elsewhere, about, regularity of practice, obviously, not just, sporadically. If we're sitting, most days of the week, if we can sit at more or less the same time of day, that also helps, rather in the same way if we eat 3 meals a day or go to bed, at a regular time, then our body sort of knows what it's supposed to be doing and begins to gear itself up to that. So in the same way, if we sit meditation at the same time, that obviously gets us into a habit, but also visual clues are important to the psyche. So if we go before a shrine and we have a shrine and we go through certain, simple rituals such as lighting incense and bowing, for example, then that also signals to the heart that what we are about to do. And that gets us into the mood. And by the time we sit down, hopefully we're sort of halfway there. And then we can sort of sit our meditation in peace. So this is, there are good reasons to actually do it. The other reason as well is that it also becomes a focus for offerings, a focus for offering gratitude, which is, again, a useful state of heart to cultivate in the practice generally, but also to cultivate when we're sitting down. And when we're actually going to sit down for Zazen, we can cultivate gratitude that, the Buddha existed and passed down, the instructions for how to sit Zazen to allow our hearts to discover a little bit of peace. I think the other thing as well, particularly now, about sort of creating a shrine and, using it as part of our daily practice is that we're often encouraged to do everything on the fly, to do everything on the hoof, so to speak. We sort of. I was on a train. I went to the train station yesterday. I sort of got a cup of coffee, and you get a cup of coffee, and it's got a lid on it, and it's got a little hole in that you can use to sip your coffee as you're sort of running for your train, and it sort of summed life up these days for a lot of people. We're always trying to squeeze things in, aren't we? And it sort of means that things get squeezed out, or they're done half-heartedly. They're rarely given their own space, place and time, like eating a meal in front of the telly on our laps, that sort of thing. Instead of, perhaps sitting down at a table and, allowing that space to be for the meal, not distracting ourselves with phones or screens or whatever, really. So it's something that, we're almost encouraged nowadays to get out of the habit. Time is precious and all this sort of thing. Well, if we're going to cultivate Zazen really should be done for its own sake, not sort of, on the hoof or on the fly. So this is another reason to make the effort, I think, to establish a place at home, a dedicated place at home where we can actually do this. So if we do decide that we do want to set up a shrine, how can we go about that? Well, there are multiple ways, and obviously there have to be because, people's resources vary very much. If you've got a large house, and you can dedicate a whole room into a meditation room, wow, that's brilliant. But I think most of us probably can't do that. So what can we do instead? Well, if we have a shelf or a table that we can, dedicate or use and turn this to a shrine where we sit, where we're going to sit zazen, whether that's on a cushion or on a chair, either is fine. Then yes, that's great. But, you may not even have that very much, in which case even part of a bookshelf, is fine. Just clear a few books off the end of a shelf, and you can make a small shrine there. The bare necessities, I think, would be obviously a Buddha image. And when we come to that Buddha image, we may be sort of thinking, oh, do I have to go out and sort of buy a big brass statue for several £100s? The answer is no, definitely not. In fact, to be honest, I think the most important thing as far as your Buddha image is concerned is that it should be beautiful. And in fact, the people who make these images make them according to some quite, strict rules as they come down. The proportions of the Buddha, of the face, of the body, of the hands and the knees and so forth, these are measured. They have to be in a certain proportion, so that they look balanced, so that they look even, and so that they look serene. Even the look on the face is carefully crafted. And there are some pretty awful Buddha images out there, to be perfectly honest. And so, you can, when I started off, I didn't have a Buddha image. I actually used a postcard. I went to a museum. Fortunately, I live in London, so I could go to the British Museum, I think I went. And I got some, I went around and just bought some postcards. And I, selected one particular that I thought was particularly striking, beautiful, and had a certain feel to it. So it's an intuitive thing, and, spend a little bit of time doing it. Again, the more time that you can spend crafting this, the more investment that we make into it, then, the more that I think comes back to us, as it were. So, that would be a bare minimum. Obviously, you can, having a postcard of a Buddha image. Just to say, in the early days, of course, there were no Buddha images. In the first 200-300 years after the Buddha's life, the Buddha had forbade images. So people used symbols such as a footprint or a handprint or a Bodhi leaf. The Bodhi leaf is from the Bodhi tree, which is the tree at Bodh Gaya that the Buddha sat under in order to gain enlightenment. So often there was a symbol to show the presence of the Buddha. So you might prefer that. Doesn't absolutely have to be a Buddha image, but I think a lot of people do go for Buddha images. They are beautiful in their own right, and so why not? Other sort of things, other accoutrements, normally some symbol of nature is placed on the altar as well by the Buddha. This can be, flowers, a plant. It could even be plastic flowers. It doesn't even have to be, real flowers, which can get a little bit expensive. Obviously, if you've got a large table, you might, want to put a covering on it. People go, what colour? Well, again, there isn't a regulated colour. Some people like something simple, maybe black or white, or just a single colour, such as, I don't know, like a golden colour or something like that. Anything that could be meaningful to you. Obviously, gold has a colour of warmth, as do, sort of like terracotta colours, etc. They have a feeling of sort of depth and presence. Some people like something patterned. Don't go completely overboard, and I wouldn't do anything too psychedelic. After all, we're trying to encourage the heart to settle down, not to be overstimulated or stirred up. So, give thought to a few of those sort of considerations. So you might, as I say, you might have a flower or a plant or something like that, or even just a picture of flowers. Even that would be fine. But something to symbolise nature in its sort of wider form. Light is another thing that's often offered to the Buddha. Usually this is in the form of a candle or candles placed either side of the Buddha. Obviously, be careful with regards to not setting things on fire. Don't leave candles unattended, etc. One alternative actually that is absolutely fine are those small little electric candles. I've used those before as well. And some of them, are quite realistic these days. So yeah, have a look around on your high street, see what you can find. And then, of course, there's incense as well. I use the little incense sticks, sort of sandalwood is quite common in Japanese temples. Obviously, Zen is the form of Zen that I practice is Japanese. You can get these boxes of them from supply shops, etc. And you just light them, and you have a little sort of container with sand in to stand it in. Alternatives to that could be things like essential oils. The little where you have the candle underneath and you have the little sort of cup on the top, fireproofed obviously, and then you just put some essential oil in there. I mean, it's quite nice. These are both offerings, but they also help create atmosphere, which is important. We are trying to create, an atmosphere so that when we come into the room where it is, or when we turn and when we see, when it comes into awareness, when we actually see the shrine, it produces a response in our own heart. It reminds us not only obviously of our aspiration to practice, but also, it creates a change in our heart. So, if we were full of cares and worries and woes and whatever, when we see that altar, it inspires us, it lifts the heart, it warms the heart. So for that purpose as well, therefore, please keep it clean and tidy. If we are using incense or candles, remove wax, remove, sort of dead incense sticks, etc. And just keep it clean and tidy. Look after it, dust it, clean the Buddha image in particular. Again, this is all part of the dedication, all part of the investment into creating the atmosphere in that place. And what we find is that as over time, over months and years, as we sit there, it does begin to build up some little atmosphere. And this is important. And another sort of lesson that can come out of this is that, a room is a room is a room. But how do you turn a room into a zendo? How do you turn a room into a living room? For example, when I first started the practice, I used to go to the Buddhist Society in London, and we used to use a lecture room. And, it had lecture room written on the door, and you walked in and it was just a very large sort of Georgian room, with various things in it. And then we would set up an altar, and then we would set up the cushions, and then we'd place the candles and the incense and everything onto the altar, and we'd get everything just ready, and hey presto, suddenly it was a zendo. And then when we finished, we disassembled the whole thing, and it just became an empty room. And on other days when we weren't using it, people would give lectures in there. So the seats would be put out as a lecture, and the speaker would be, sat where the altar is. And there it was a lecture room. But you behave differently depending on the circumstances. So if it was a zendo, you would walk in with your hands pressed palms together in gasho, and you would bow to the Buddha, and you'd, process in the correct way to your seat and bow and so forth before sitting down. But if it was a lecture, obviously you'd take your shoes off before you go in. But if it was a lecture, you went in with your shoes on. And you didn't bow when you walked in, because it's a lecture room now. So that's how you behave in a lecture room. So this is about transformation. This is about how to transform a space from one thing into another. And obviously it's a home. And, if it happens to be in a bedroom or in a spare room or something like that, sometimes it will, you sleep in there as a bedroom, or your guests will use it as a spare room. But when you go in to sit Zazen, it becomes the zendo. So be aware of how spaces can be transformed into places. The same space can become different places depending, what we do in there, how we set things up, and so forth. So, yeah, something to experiment with, and something to learn from as well. Okay, we'll leave that there.